I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our podcast on Fantastic Max, which was shown on CBBC in the late 80s/early 90s, and is a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, really. You would never see it featured in lists of popular Hanna-Barbera cartoons, along with Yogi Bear and the Flintstones and
Hong Kong Phooey and Inch High Private Eye and Captain Caveman, obviously Scooby-Doo. It's never been on Boomerang, like most, if not all of those were at one point.
I suppose because it's very late, it was produced in like 88 and 89, out of the Hanna-Barbera peak. The last thing Hanna-Barbera ever produced as a company, on the side note, was the first season of the Powerpuff Girls in 1998. So obviously they were around for a while, but they were certainly past their glory days.
Of course, one of their shows we forgot to mention just then is The Jetsons, which is perhaps the most like Fantastic Max.
Ah, yes, indeed. So obviously it found some sort of audience and network in the US, and CBBC thought it would be a good thing to show over here as well, and I suppose they were right. Its creator is a person called Mike Young. We used to watch Fantastic Max regularly. It was one of the few CBBC shows we were avidly into, as I've mentioned many times. Mostly ITV we used to watch. It didn't used to be on as part of going live or anything, so we actually made the effort to sit down and watch Fantastic Max on CBBC after school, and indeed if we weren't going to be there, evidently we set it to record on the video machine, which must have been 1990 or after, as we found the end of an episode the other week on an old video that we were watching the Warner Brothers cartoons on, mentioned in our last podcast. We were catching up with some old Warner Brothers cartoons, and what should we find? That they had recorded over at the end of a Fantastic Max episode and a Thundercats episode. Quite extraordinary find, that. But we'd also been watching recently, which is why it was quite a funny coincidence, the videos of Fantastic Max that I bought off eBay or Amazon or both, a mixture, a few years ago, and some of the comments and analysis that Rosie had while watching those videos were quite interesting and are going to be put into a podcast for posterity. The premise of the show really is that Max is a baby, but he's a hyper-intelligent baby since playing with FX's antenna, which zapped him with magic, because FX is magic. And now he's hyper-intelligent and he talks and walks and so on. Fantastic Max does. And the other main character is AB, who's a robot made of building blocks, apparently.
It looks more like sort of Meccano to me, which makes more sense if you're going to say he's a robot.
And he's also brought to life by FX's magic, and sometimes you'll see AB listed as his character name as AB Sitter. It's a play on babysitter. And he does call himself Max's plastic parent at times.
I guess Meccano's metal, but building blocks are made of wood, so I don't know. It doesn't really make sense, does it?
And in that first episode on the video, the first episode that was made, The Loon in the Moon, he does build this other robot out of what I think is supposed to be sort of building blocks, which presumably is how he made AB as well, and FX brings it to life as normal. But what Fantastic Max and FX and AB do is to have adventures in space, basically.
That's what they should do. They don't always, do they?
And we did used to enjoy those space adventures when we were children, despite the fact that our mother always used to go around saying, as you may remember from the Back to the Future podcast, stuff with aliens in it is stupid and isn't worth watching. We always thought Fantastic Max was the exception to that, although we've since discovered, as I mentioned in the Back to the Future podcast, you can do lots of good storytelling with space and aliens, just as you can with many, many things. And they do it by FX's magic again, turning the sand sculpture that Max makes, all various things from around the house, into rocket ships to fly up into space.
On your video, he didn't use the sound as much as I was expecting.
No, we always had the staple, and when we used to play it as a little game when we were younger, we always had, they'd go out into the garden and Max builds the baby bottle rocket in the sand and FX brings it to life, which they do treat it like their staple way of doing it in the dialogue and stuff.
If they're not doing anything in particular or it's leading on to something else that doesn't need a lot of build-up or turn into anything different, that's what they'll do, and they do it in the opening title sequence, don't they?
FX, like all good aliens, is green, and his powers are used in the show wherever and however the writers want them to be used, and are ignored or arbitrarily said they won't work in this situation, where the writers aren't looking for a quick fix. If you break it down and think about it, FX has created, brought to life, or at least made able to talk, both the other main characters and all the props and bits and bobs that they use in the whole premise of the show. In many ways, FX is like God, but it's very easy for the writers to come to and say, oh yes, well we need this to happen, we can use FX's magic to make a time machine, bring the toys to life, whatever they need to happen in the episode. Or if it's, well, they're stuck in this place, why can't FX use his magic? I will say his powers don't work there. It's one of those fix all when you need it and arbitrarily say, oh no, can't possibly do that when you don't need it.
Well, speaking of the time machine, they wanted him to do something, didn't they, in that episode? And FX turned around and said, oh, well, my powers won't work in the past.
Even though he's created the time machine with his powers, powering their whole trip through time. It's no sense.
In one of the episodes, on one of your videos, there's this bit, isn't there, where AB and FX are locked out of the house, and the only way they can possibly get in is to climb up to Zoe's open window. They can't use FX's magic for that, they don't even think of it. But then a bit later in the same episode, FX can make a helicopter, which has got Max in it, into a computer game helicopter of which Zoe has the controls.
Good example. And that was something I always noticed, and it used to bother me when I watched it as a youngster, how FX's powers weren't consistent, and that's how it needs to be for the premise of the show to actually work.
One of the excuses was, I can't, I'm too scared, wasn't it?
Yes, that was one of them. And that particularly bothered me because, as FX had magic powers, I liked him, and I had to be him when we would play the game. That was alright, because Rosie got to play the title character for once.
Yes, and funnily enough, he was also, I think, and having seen the videos I can see why, my favourite character. Usually, if I did get to play the title character, it was because Jake liked someone else more, and possibly I did too, but I think I was quite satisfied in this case.
You mentioned Zoe there, who's, I suppose, the principal secondary character, and she's Max's older sister. Now, didn't she say she was supposed to be 5 in one of the episodes?
I am a 5-year-old.
Yeah, and Max is 1, and they stupid parents, one of whom has the same voice as Shirley the Loon, apparently. Probably the mum.
Probably, yes.
Overburden Zoe with responsibility for Max, and they have her take him to the park in his stroller, and in that one that we found on the end of the tape at the end of the episode, she'd been left to take him all around the fun fair. And it's a horrible form of child abuse, really, overburdening this 5-year-old with responsibility for a baby brother, and then locking her in a room when she loses him and stuff. So it's no wonder that Zoe doesn't feel very positive towards Max. It's all the parents' fault, really. But she certainly serves as an antagonist in the series, so he mustn't find out. So he's done something to spoil our fun. And that episode you mentioned with FX and the helicopter video game Zoe.
And driving along in Zoe's Barbie convertible pink car sort of thing that FX has made real, and Zoe's driving, and I'm saying she's going to get pulled over, and you say, well, in real life she would, but she doesn't.
In that one, Zoe comes in on the secret because FX and AB decide they need her help to get Max back from Cape Canaveral, where he's being examined and dissected as an alien for various reasons. But it was interesting, the point you made at the end of that one. It's called The Babe Who Fell to Earth. That they had an opportunity there for some sort of proper interaction and camaraderie between Max and Zoe that they just completely missed. And then, of course, Zoe wakes up and thinks it's all a dream, blah, blah, blah. But that was an interesting point you made about Zoe and Max should have had a proper interaction, conversation, so they weren't always having the terrible relationship that this parents foisted on them.
Yes, Zoe seemed quite pleased and interested to discover that Max was a space baby, and then he's just not gonna let her carry on knowing about it.
They should have had her come in on The Secret at a certain point, perhaps for season 2, rather like Jazz Fenton and Danny Phantom.
Very much so.
It would have been a good progression for the show, but these shows who are too stuck in their status quo to ever change it, alter it slightly, it's a shame. There's a missed opportunity, I think.
Well, as I shall discuss later, it has a lot of unrealised potential. Before I do, shall we mention Ben?
Oh, yeah.
That's a funny one, because he's their neighbour, isn't he? He's about Zoe's age.
Yeah, so it seems.
And I would have said that he was in on The Secret. But apparently he's not. He's in 2 episodes on your video, isn't he? And one of them he's going out trick-or-treating dressed as Big Ben, which I thought was rather clever, actually. And in the other one, he learns the secret, and then they do this thing where they drive through a sort of time hole thing to make him forget. So perhaps all my memories of Ben came from that episode where he's going around in space with them. And if he's not in on The Secret, I'm not really sure what the point of him is.
Yes, it appears at times, like in the Halloween one, and when he thinks he's playing some sort of trick on her in another episode, but he's not there. He appears to have a sort of love-hate relationship going on with Zoe. I don't know. Maybe they should both be in on it at some point and have some Earth in space between 5-year-olds.
Yes, well, they're only about 4 years off the Arnold age.
Yes, indeed. Very nearly ready.
Well, shall I tell you everything I thought then?
Yes.
It's a funny one because obviously as children we used to watch it and enjoy it a lot, and I can see why. Before you showed me those videos, I would have been able to tell you who Max, FX, AB, Zoe, and slightly Ben were, and I would have been able to describe pretty accurately what they look like, and I would have said they build a rocket out of the sandpit and go around in space, and that's largely true. So obviously that aspect of it captured our imaginations.
Very much so.
I said those things about Max and Zoe's relationship, which are very true. What else did I think? Max has quite a good dynamic with AB, I think. It's not massively complicated, but it's as much as you want from a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, where AB is all like really uptight and telling Max to keep his clothes on and not drive the spaceship too fast. And sometimes he gets a bit snooty about Max talking to Jippos and space bums and saying they're smelly and stuff like that, which is a bit dodgy. And then Max says, "Relax, AB, hang loose, AB," something like that, and does what AB doesn't want him to, and gets them into a situation which I think is quite good fun, actually. But it did strike me that FX doesn't really seem to fit into the dynamic. Max is a little Hitler, by the way. You were talking earlier on about, forgotten his name.
Oh, in the very first episode, the new robot that Max built, and he names it WT.
For no particular reason.
Yes.
2 letters, I suppose. Yes. He gets into a situation where they need to use him to power the spaceship sort of thing or something.
They want to take bits off him, don't they, to mend the moon mechanism.
Which makes sense if you watch the episode, sort of, as much sense as it needs to make.
Yeah.
And WT is all like, "Oh no, I don't want to get taken to pieces." And Max goes, "I made you and I can wake you." And I think, Jesus, that's very questionable. Would he say the same thing to AB? If AB ever got too annoying, perhaps he would.
FX should say that to Max at some point, see how Max reacts.
Well, quite. But anyway, I was talking about FX, and Max being a little Hitler. In relation to each other, Max treats FX like his slave. There's this bit where they're being very indiscreet, aren't they? They've gone to the park with Zoe, and Max is saying, make this, turn this into a boombox, have a party with me, that kind of thing, and FX just does it. And he really is just there to do the magic, and it struck me that he didn't have very much character at all. In the opening title sequence, they're doing this sort of dance together, aren't they? And they're smiling and they look like they're having fun, and I thought maybe they would have quite a fun relationship. Maybe FX would be with Max in the kind of situations where AB doesn't want to do stuff, but then maybe he could keep Max grounded a bit and be the voice of reason with him or something like that. There should be some good dynamics between them. And he and AB hardly interact at all, I seem to remember.
Which really underlines the fact that FX is there for the writers to use or not use to make things happen or not make things happen as they wish. And the fact that they can't really even be bothered to give him a proper dynamic with either of the other two main characters, it's a shame, and it shows how FX himself isn't so much a character as Max and AB, although there are times, I think, where they try to rectify this, and I think the episode that made you most think that they'd done something decent with FX was the one called Boohoo, wasn't it?
Well, is that the one with his cousin, XS?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. XS is a brilliant name for a Twinklerian, by the way. Obviously, they have two-letter names that sound kind of like a word. If Max is making up a two-letter name, he doesn't think whether it sounds like a word or not. But that's how it works on Twinkle Twinkle, which is where FX is from. Can't remember if you mentioned.
No, we didn't bother saying that. Yes, FX makes special FX, and XS is excessive. It's very clever.
Excessively mischievous. And yes, he was going around telling FX that he was a coward and stuff like that because FX didn't want to. I can't even remember, sort of like climb up things and jump off things. I don't know.
Yes, it all starts when XS wants to go to this scary planet for Halloween, and FX doesn't want to, and then he doesn't want to climb up the cliff, he doesn't want to go in the river, he doesn't want to do silly bravado things like XS wants to do.
But then Max gets into some kind of trouble, hopefully. I can't remember it all now, but hopefully he's done something reckless, and AB has said, I don't think you should do that, Max, and Max has said, relax, AB, and done it anyway. Is that what happened?
Yes, doubtless. I can't remember the specific interaction with AB in that one, but it must have been there, because Max had gone off on his own and got involved with the man on the planet who's actually a chicken in disguise, and his name's Mr. McGool, and he likes to scare people, and the irony is that he's very scared himself, and that's why he's a giant chicken.
Yes, well, that's how it should have happened anyway, with that dynamic between AB and Max. Maybe that was missing and it was sacrificed for what they actually did with FX. I don't remember. You can tell it's not fantastically memorable, the actual specific detail, which it would be if the dynamics were better. But anyway, you could probably see where this is going now anyhow. When FX learns that Max is in trouble, he wants to save him, and XS starts getting scared and saying, oh no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, we might get killed. There's something to do with using their courage, and XS is all like, oh, I've got shed loads of courage. And the giant chicken's like, oh no, you haven't, FX has got more courage.
Yes, because FX has forged the way into the lair of Mr. McGool, going, I don't care, we have to save Max. And that was the true courage. And he's trying to extract courage, Mr. McGool, and put it in this machine so that he can have it himself.
Oh, yes, of course, that makes perfect sense.
And FX has more courage, he says, as he said, because XS is all bravado and no real courage. So yes, an important message, important times for FX, and probably one of the better episodes, really, even though FX himself doesn't do any magic in it. It's all XS making the spaceship.
Yes, you commented on that. I said I didn't really care. I'm more interested in the characterization. So perhaps that's why I wasn't particularly bothered about FX when I was young. Nothing about him really caught my imagination. Max was the character who did that with his adventurousness and cockiness.
And of course, there's plenty of opportunity in Boohoo to use Twinclarian magic to defeat Mr. Magoo and his scary creatures that he's sending after them, but neither FX nor XS will do it because the writers don't want them to. But something that might absolutely blow your mind if you're interested in FX and Twinclarian magic in that episode is that everyone knows FX's magical control command magic words to activate his magic is rocket and roll.
Yes, everyone knows that.
Which is always written as the word rocket. R-O-C-K-E-T, like space rocket, and roll. And yet XS activates his magic with the phrase rock'em and sock'em. Now, are we to assume then that FX is not saying rocket, but rock it, as in rock'em? Rock them, rock it and roll. I always wonder that, and if you know the answer, well, you're better off than I am.
I shouldn't think the writers even really know.
No, probably not.
But obviously you have to use rock as a word on its own or part of a word in your magic words if you are a Twinclarian.
Yes, I don't know if they ever bothered to think of any more.
Well, we need to watch that Origin episode to find out, I suppose.
Yes, is it time to talk about that yet, or have you more analysis?
Well, I don't know. I was bored by the episodes where they didn't go into space.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
I was surprised to see them, and I'm not surprised that I didn't remember them. Thinking about how much I enjoyed them now, obviously they would have been much the best episodes when I was young. I would have said they went into space in every episode because that's the way it should be.
It's the USP, isn't it? And they really should go into space every time, as those non-space episodes have shown us. With the kind of surreal characters and surreal humour they do. You need to be in space, really, to make it work. Like this one where they go to get Max from Cape Canaveral, and the scientists there are caricatures of the Three Stooges, which probably went over the heads of the young audience. I mean, that would be better if they were aliens, I think, rather than real people, supposedly.
I did quite like that first one because they noticed that something was wrong with the moon and went into space to sort it out. They didn't use the sandpit, which blew my mind. After that, even if they went into space, they went into space to mess about, didn't they? Not because they had a space mission to do.
And then they would fall into a mission, like on Doctor Who.
And Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, and Poirot.
As opposed to something like The Bill, where it's part of their job, really. But anyway, I like that one because animal with a long nose, did it have?
It's a sort of beak, but he's the man in the moon.
Yes, and he's voiced by Lorenzo Music, who's best known as Garfield, of course, and one of the Gummy Bears and Peter Venkman in The Real Ghostbusters Season 1 and 2. Very distinctive voice he has. And that's the episode with WT. So anyway, something's off with the moon. They notice they go into space. They've made WT for no particular reason, because the writers wanted them to, because AB was too uptight and Max was saying, well, I'm going to make a new robot then. He doesn't threaten to break AB, though. And they go into space to sort it out, and Lorenzo Music and WT start making a connection, an emotional connection, and then WT decides to stay with Lorenzo Music to power the mechanism, or so they say. And they're like flying around in space and stuff, and the moon's careening out of control, and then they stop it with this parachute coming out of the back, and Jake goes, that doesn't make any sense. Which is true, because within the parameters of the universe, everything that's happened so far does make sense. There's a man in the moon, he kind of drives it. The baby and the toy come to life, and the alien go into space and help sort it out. But a parachute using wind in space to stop the thing flying off, that doesn't make any sense. And by the way, I noticed Max can breathe without a spacesuit. And I said, well, okay, I guess that's just part of being a super baby and FX's magic effect on him. But then wasn't Ben in space not needing a spacesuit, so that doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah, they took that one too far.
So there's a certain amount of lazy writing. And then after that episode with Lorenzo Music and the moon and WT and everything, I think it was an episode where they didn't go into space, so I was particularly disappointed with that. And then I was quite disappointed even with the other space episodes, because I've explained they were just messing about, the plots weren't that well thought out, until that one called Boohoo, which we've just talked about. I thought that was definitely the best, and the one with the man in the moon is the second best.
It's interesting because the first 6 episodes we watched on those videos was season 1, and then Boohoo and the one with Ben in space are actually season 2 episodes. So I wonder if, before making season 2, they've gone away and said, now let's see what works and what doesn't work. And just arsing about in space perhaps needs a little more substance to it. I always liked that Ben one, particularly. I can't remember what it's called now. And when you were talking about Max being a little Hitler, that reminds me, I always liked the bit where Ben's in on the secret and wants to go into space in return for not telling, and Max says, alright, well, we'll take him into space, and then we'll dump him. I like that. And you're like, and AB's like, oh, Max, you wouldn't really do that. No, I wouldn't dump him forever, AB, just for a bit, till he learns to keep his mouth shut. It's very in character for Max, and very amusing. There are some episodes where Max becomes the hero, the saviour of the planet Beach Ball, for example, which is deflating and needs more water and stuff. So Max often does take on the heroic role that the title of the show would seem to suggest that he has. But often, yes, it's just a little sadist.
He likes messing about in space and making judgments on the alien races. But
rather like Captain Kirk.
Yes, but I'll tell you what I forgot that I hate. They keep making references to being on television, and I can't stand that. It doesn't add anything, it's not funny, and in fact it takes away. It stops you from being immersed in the universe if they're aware that they're on television. It's ridiculous. We were talking last time about Tiny Toons and how they know they're on TV. But even then, and I didn't mention this at the time, I don't think, but even then, if they're immersed in a story and they're like falling off a cliff or something, they shouldn't start talking about the writers. It takes you right out of the moment. The only thing they really get that right that I can think of is Earthworm Jim, which we will podcast about one day, which is another wacky space adventure sort of thing. But in Fantastic Max, they definitely shouldn't do it. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I do. It detracts a lot. It's surreal enough already. And there's this bit where they go into a black hole by accident, and in the black hole, they're kind of inside a TV. You can see people watching them inside the black hole. And I said, well, that might have worked as a joke, as this is what it's like inside a black hole, if they didn't do it all the rest of the time in the show when they're not in a black hole. Man's watching them in the black hole saying, oh, it's a show about a baby in space, and his wife says, oh, is it any good? And he says, not yet. And you think, yeah, you know, they're in a black hole, you could chuck in a TV joke there, but because they do that kind of thing all the time anyway, it's like, well, why bother saying they're in a black hole? Do it. Of course, FX's magic worked inside the black hole in order to help get them out, which you could easily not have done if they didn't want the quick fix as a side point.
So you see, from all that, how it's got a lot of potential that it really misses, and it makes a lot of mistakes, which is a shame. But on the other hand, when we were children, we used to watch it and absolutely love it, or certainly enjoy it a lot, so arguably it's done everything that's required of it. It's just that it's nice if cartoons go a step further, like the City of Gold, Extreme Ghostbusters, things like that we've talked about before, and you don't come back to them after all these years and find problems.
When I first got the videos, I used to laugh at one of their on-TV jokes, which is where Max has taken off his diaper.
He does that a lot, doesn't he?
Yes, and AB is saying to him, Max, make yourself decent. And Max goes, relax, AB, it's no big thing. And AB goes, I know, but you still can't show it on TV. And of course I laughed at that because I like knob gags. But it's not really a very good way of making a joke in the show, and it does take Max and AB outside the parameters that they should be inside.
Jake likes knob jokes, I like relax AB, and they could have done the same joke with It's No Big Thing. Just don't bring television into it. Just have AB say, maybe not, but you can't show it to everyone at this place where we're going, or something.
Yes, good point. Yeah. They were inside a recycling bin at the time, and AB should have said, you can't show it to everyone who empties this recycling bin.
Something like that, and it was a bit disappointing, actually, when another time Max's diaper came off and he went, I'm so embarrassed. I like him better as a sort of exhibitionist. It fits in better with his devil-may-care attitude, which is what I always liked about him.
And the fact that he's won.
Yes, that too.
It's nice to take it back to, yes, he's a baby. He doesn't care if he wanders around showing everyone his business. Even though he's hyper-intelligent and talks and drives spaceships and things, he's still a baby at heart.
So that was quite a lot to say before we talked about the origin episode, which I forgot the name of, From Here to Twinkle Twinkle.
Yes.
We assume.
Well, when I was buying the videos, I was looking for the origin episode because we both remembered the origin episode, in essence, fairly well, I think. I bought the video called The Babe Who Fell to Earth because I thought that was going to be the origin episode, because in the description on Wikipedia, it sounded kind of like it was going to be the origin episode, even though it isn't. Now, with a bit of investigation after we watched my videos quite recently, I realised that the first season of 13 episodes had 4 video releases with 3 episodes each, making 12 episodes. And then the second season has double video releases instead. So, somewhere along the line, someone's forgotten or not bothered to release the final episode of season 1, because it doesn't fit into 3 episodes on one video, which is called From Here to Twinkle Twinkle. And I do believe it must be the origin episode with the flashbacks that we remember so well. It would make a lot of sense to have that at the end of the first season. It's getting a bit reflective. It's FX saying, should I go home to Twinkle Twinkle and effectively kill you both by not being here with my magic anymore? And then they look back on their time together and decide to carry on and make a second season. And that's very much what we remember the origin episode being like, I think.
Was there some footage of Twinkle Twinkle and FX's native race in it?
Yes, I'm sure there is. They're all different colours, but they're not all green.
Is there like an old woman sort of thing who's in control of things?
Oh, like Mother Nature on Super Ted.
Well, perhaps I'm getting them mixed up or something, but I can't remember at all how Max and FX end up in the same place. But
No.
FX has to leave Twinkle Twinkle for some reason, perhaps not permanently, and this woman, I think she was pink or purple or some feminine colour, is making him or asking him to, and I can't remember at all the reasons for it, but I do think I remember when he meets up with Max. And what planet are they on anyway, Earth?
They probably are on Earth at the time.
And Max is a babbling baby coming up to him and giggling, and FX goes, no, don't touch those. But he's not talking about his testicles. He's talking about his antenna, where the magic comes from, and Max touching the antenna makes him have the ability to talk and rationalise and breathe in space and whatever. I do remember that, I think.
Yes, me too.
And I also remember him making AB, do you?
No, I don't.
I do remember that. I don't think it looks exactly like it does in the opening title sequence. That's a sort of abridged version to give us the idea. But he's having this conversation with FX, I think. And for some reason, he decides to make a robot out of his Meccano, or whatever it is. And he's all like, can you bring him to life? And FX is all like, yeah, okay, I think. And I do remember him naming AB, I'm pretty sure of that. AB is all like, whoa, what's going on, man? And Max explains and says, this is FX and you're, AB. And I think that kind of makes sense. Maybe if he's heard the alphabet as a small child, people doing ABC at him, he might have learned AB. Got the idea that his companions are going to have names consisting of 2 letters, so it makes a lot more sense than WT.
Yes, and you can tell by the end of the season there they've abandoned the AB sitter concept. What an episode to not release on video, especially as they've released all the crappy season 1 one. It's a shame we can't see that, because it'd be good to see it again.
I may have remembered everything completely wrong.
It was definitely something like that.
Something like that, yes. I really want to know if this pink matriarch on Twinkle Twinkle is true, and if so, what she was getting FX to do, but I guess I'll never know.
That would be one video worth buying to add to my collection of 3 videos, but as it doesn't exist, I have decided that what I bought several years ago is plenty. There are some other episodes that I do remember. One quite memorable one is where there's some sort of film festival to honour Fantastic Max in space, and it's got like Fantastic Max and FX and AB in this black and white Psycho parody.
Don't forget to wash behind your ears.
Yeah, and it actually helped me to be surprised by the big reveal, in the real Psycho, because in it, AB plays the Norman Bates character, and FX plays the mother character with the wig and everything, and you never get that in the original film. Spoiler, they're actually the same person. So if you watch that Fantastic Max Psycho parody, make the end reveal of Psycho even more surprising to you.
Unless they just listen to you giving it away.
Yes.
So they must be quite happy with Max's work in the space then, if they're making this film festival for him.
And in that, there's the Fantastic Max lookalike competition, which Fantastic Max enters against AB's advice, of course.
Oh yes, that sounds quite good, actually.
And comes third.
That's hilarious. He comes third.
It's rather like the Loch Ness Monster model competition on the Family Ness, where Ferocious Ness is entered and comes third, even though he's a real Loch Ness Monster. It's a great joke, though.
It's funnier in Fantastic Max, because everyone knows what he looks like. No one knows what the Loch Ness Monsters look like.
Ah, indeed. So, yes, a memorable one there.
The only thing I can remember that wasn't on your videos is don't forget to wash behind your ears.
Yes, AB comes in with the scrubbing brush, and the handle looks like the knife from Psycho, and Max is in the shower, and AB pulls it back, and you can see the scrubbing brush looking like a knife, and he's going, "Wash behind your ears!" And then he washes behind Max's ears like Janet Leigh. And at that point, yes, AB is actually wearing the mother wig, so you might get it from that, but you've already seen FX dressed up as mother telling AB, "You know what to do." Wash behind his ears. Very strange, that. But
Yes.
rather fun.
It probably just mostly went over my head, all that, and I didn't even worry about who had a wig on. I just found the wash behind your ears thing quite funny, I think.
So there we are. We're not going to watch more videos of that, but it was certainly worth looking back at and analysing and comparing why it was better almost 30 years ago than it is now to us. Let's briefly mention the voice work, which is all very appropriate. FX was done by Nancy Cartwright, and you said something like, "I didn't think he sounded quite so much like Bart Simpson."
That's exactly what I thought. He sounded much more like Bart than I was expecting.
And I guess at the time Nancy Cartwright was doing Bart on the Tracy Ullman show, and she thought, hey, be a good voice for FX as well.
Yeah, she has quite a few different voices, doesn't she? And none of them really sound like Bart, except FX.
Interesting. If you asked her in 1989 which of those 2 characters will you still be doing that voice for in 28 years?
She'd say, oh, come on, neither of them.
Oh, do you know who else sounds quite like them? Rufus. Rufus the naked mole rat from Kim Possible.
Does he?
Yes, he's got quite Barton FX about him, I always thought. Oh, that's the Cartwright. Not that I watch Kim Possible that much.
I watched it quite a bit while babysitting, and I may have noticed at the time, but I've quite forgotten now.
So a practiced voice actress there in Nancy Cartwright, although I suppose she wasn't that practiced when she was actually doing it. But another well-experienced voice actor was Greg Berger, who did AB, and you can hear him on a lot of stuff, like he's Orson in Orson's Farm, and you see him in additional voices from most cartoons from sort of 80s and 90s. And at the beginning, in that Loon in the Moon one, the pilots, he gives AB this sort of prim and proper, now Max, I am your plastic parent, and a sort of butlery, sort of posh sort of thing going on, which he very quickly stops doing, probably through laziness, but it's actually a good idea. But it does fit in with this kind of prim and pris and snobby character that AB is sometimes. And then Zoe, you find out, if you look it up, was done by Elizabeth Harnoy, who was in that thing, Point Pleasant, as a older teenager. And what was she, about 10 when she did it?
Not Point Pleasant, Fantastic Max.
Yes, and it's a very good performance, isn't it?
Her voice really changes between the two seasons, which I thought was quite interesting. She sounds more like an older child in season 2.
And the same thing is true, actually, of Fantastic Max himself. Not that he breaks his voice or anything, because I think he was like sort of 8 and 9 when he did it. But his name is Ben Granger without the first R. I mean, how do you pronounce it? Ganger? Ganger? I don't know.
Ganger?
Ganger, something like that. They accidentally put an R in it in the season 2 credits, and it needs an R in it, really, but that's not actually his name. I mean, you can see why they picked him, can't you? Because he sounds like a baby, or did at the time.
Yes, and he's very good.
I mean, he obviously babies it up a bit, but not just anyone, even a young child could sound quite so much like a talking baby. And another piece of voice work he did, Ben G, was in Tiny Toon Adventures, in an episode we didn't mention, but which we always did remember and think was funny, where he plays Duncan, the rabbit, in Babs' babysitting, and Duncan drives Babs absolutely mad while she's babysitting him. And we always quote it, don't we? Master Potato Man. He won't eat his mashed potato unless it's made into a poison. And Master Potato Man needs biscotti hair. So that always made us laugh, and still does.
It's a Sinead O'Connor mashed potato man, she says, before she agrees to make it spaghetti hair.
And then when she's made it spaghetti hair, he goes, if I eat him, he'll die. After all that effort.
And that's pretty much the whole sequence, which is the best bit of the episode, and obviously a very good performance by Ben Ganger there.
Yes. Apparently he's in some really, really, really disturbing film about being 5 siblings or something being locked in a basement. Oh, maybe it's an attic. It's called Flowers in the Attic.
Oh, yeah, it's probably an attic.
Yes. And he plays this youngest child, and 2 oldest siblings sort of parent him, and it all gets very weird, and I didn't really want to see it, but...
Sounds a bit depressing.
Yes, he's been in a few things anyway, and, well, they were lucky he was around to provide the voice of Fantastic Max, because you needed that exact voice.
We sometimes talk about getting these young actors at just the right time, and there's another example.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't do that in podcasts, actually. I can't remember now, but it's something that happens.
Well, I'd watched the BBC's Just William from 2010, and I've said, which is true, they got Daniel Roche at just the right time to be William. Not when he was too young, and not when he was too old looking like a rugby player. And the same is true of many acting performances and voice acting performances, and Fantastic Max is certainly a prime example of that. And as I say, the voice work's all very accomplished and fits in very well, and certainly isn't the origin of any of the shortcomings or drawbacks that the show has, although there are several, as we have outlined. So there we are, Fantastic Max. One time CBBC cartoon, one time injudiciously released video fodder, and well worth a little discussion in the Olden Days podcast, which hopefully you've enjoyed to some extent. Do join us again on the final Sunday in March for our next podcast, which is going to be about
The Crystal Maze.
Lots
to say about that, haven't we?
Lots to get through. So, hopefully that will be fascinating for all involved. Do join us for that. Until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.